This is Chapter 22, Section 2, called The Home Front. In this section, we're going to discuss how the country supported the war from home. We'll talk a little bit about politics, talk a lot about the economy. Okay, so let's get started. Your focus question for this section is, how did the United States mobilize economic resources and promote popular support for the war effort? So within the United States, the war transformed the role of the federal government, even more than the Great Depression had. Roosevelt established new wartime agencies, such as the War Production Board, the War Manpower Commission, and Office of Price Administration to control labor distribution, shipping, manufacturing quotas, and fixed wages, prices, and rents. The number of federal workers rose from 1 million to 4 million, and unemployment, at a rate of 14% in 1940, virtually disappeared by 1943. The government built housing for war workers and forced civilian companies to produce materials for the war effort. Auto plants now made trucks, tanks, and jeeps for the Army. The gross national product more than doubled to $214 billion during the war, and federal wartime spending equaled twice the amount spent in all previous 150 years. The government sold millions of war bonds, hiked taxes, and started taking income tax from Americans' paychecks. By 1945, the number of Americans paying taxes increased. Ties between corporations and the federal government grew much closer during World War II, with business executives taking key positions in federal agencies supervising war industries. Roosevelt gave incentives to increase production. Most federal spending went to the largest companies, which sped up long-term trend toward economic concentration. And by the war's end, the 200 biggest industrial firms represented nearly half of all corporate assets in the nation. Wartime production was gargantuan in scale and shocking in its intensity, not only making military equipment by the millions, but also leading to inventions such as radar, jet engines, and early computers. The war helped restore the reputation of big business and the big business that the Depression had tarnished. Federal funds restored old manufacturing areas and fostered new ones. On the West Coast, in places like Southern California, home to steel and aircraft production, and in the South, where out-migration military-related factories and shipyards shifted employment from agriculture to industry. This raised the South's incomes, but did not end its deep poverty, sparse urbanization, or undeveloped economy, which still depended on agriculture, extractive industries like mining, lumber, and oil, or manufacturing linked to agriculture, such as cotton and textiles. Organized labor saw the war as a struggle for freedom that would expand economic and political democracy at home and to secure its influence in politics and industry. During the war, unions were part of a three-sided arrangement with government and business that allowed union membership to rise to unprecedented numbers. To win industrial peace and stabilize war production, the federal government forced resistant employers to recognize unions. In turn, union leaders promised not to strike and recognized employers' right to managerial prerogatives and fair profits. One of the tactics that was used to prevent unions from striking was patriotism. It was un-American to strike at that time. By war's end, unions were entrenched in many economic sectors, and nearly 15 million workers, a third of the non-farm labor workforce, were union members, the highest proportion in U.S. history. But labor was a less powerful partner in the war than business or government. The New Deal's decline continued during the war, and Congress became thoroughly dominated by a conservative alliance between Republicans and Southern Democrats, who retained Social Security but ended programs allegedly controlled by leftists, such as the Civilian Conservation Corps and the Works Progress Administration. Many workers protested the demanding wartime conditions and the freeze on wages, imposed by the government even while corporate profits soared. Here you see throughout the country wartime Army and Navy bases and airfields that were established throughout the country as a result of World War II. So, of course, along the coasts, you have your naval bases, but airfield bases, stations, Army camps, forts, and posts that were already established were added upon with more, simply to support the war effort. You can see very clearly how just from 1933 to 1945, how important and strong labor unions became during World War II. And again, labor had the upper hand during this time because employers needed labor desperately to be able to produce the vast quantities of product that were needed for the war. Of course, once the war ends, union membership will decline again. World War II came to be remembered as the Good War, in which the nation united behind noble goals. But all wars need the mobilization of public opinion, and freedom was a prominent theme in efforts to sell the war. Roosevelt believed the four freedoms represented essential American values that could be universalized across the globe. Freedom from fear meant a desire not only for peace, but for long-term security in a chaotic world. The importance of freedom of speech and religion seems self-evident, but their prominence emphasized the new significance of First Amendment protections of free expression. During the war, the Supreme Court judges, contrasting American constitutional liberty with Nazi tyranny, upheld the rights of religious minorities to refuse to salute the American flag in public schools, in contrast to the coercive patriotism of World War I. Freedom from want seemed the most ambiguous of the four freedoms. Though FDR first used it to refer to eliminating barriers to trade, he soon linked this freedom to guaranteeing a standard of living for American workers and farmers by preventing a return of the Depression. FDR argued this would bring real freedom for the common man. The Office of War Information, or the OWI, established in 1942 to foster public support for the war, shows how political divisions created by the New Deal shaped efforts to promote the four freedoms. Liberal staff at the OWI tried to portray the war as a people's fight for freedom against fascism and tyranny, giving it an ideological meaning while trying to avoid nationalist hysteria. Images of America standing for liberty in a world overrun by tyranny and slavery recalled the American Revolution and emancipation during the Civil War. But critics charged that FDR was promoting freedoms as realized in New Deal social programs, not just American values. Congress cut most of the funding. With the OWI's demise, mobilizing public opinion fell to private advertising firms that urged Americans to buy war bonds and take other patriotic actions. These advertising films, which sold manufactured goods for big business, worked with the National Association of Manufacturers and other companies to suggest that Roosevelt had missed a fifth freedom, free enterprise. Their message about the benefits of capitalism was reinforced by a new explosion of mass consumer goods that became available during the war despite rationing. Advocates of free enterprise told Americans to expect post-war abundance if government controls over the economy were removed. This is a patriotic war poster that was issued by the OWI, and it links the words of Abraham Lincoln to the struggle against the Nazis. This world cannot exist half slave and half free. propaganda was also used by the enemy. This is a piece of Japanese propaganda called The Rise of Asia. It is from 1943, and it is meant to assert Japan's leadership. The Japanese soldier is breaking a chain, and the chain includes letters from the Latin alphabet, the alphabet we use, and that is used in Western culture. And they are trying to break the chains of Western culture on the islands of Japan because they believe that their race was superior and that their culture should therefore triumph and spread all over the world, not Western culture. And here you have a political cartoon talking about that fifth freedom that businesses wanted FDR to add to the list of freedoms. And the fifth freedom, of course, was free enterprise. So war mobilization sparked an unprecedented growth in women's employment to fill industrial jobs left by men. Government and private ads celebrated the independent women worker with images like Rosie the Riveter, the female industrial laborer painted by Norman Rockwell as a muscle-bound and self-reliant woman. With 15 million men in the military, women in 1944 were one-third of the civilian workforce, and 350,000 women served in auxiliary units in the military. Women filled industrial, professional, and government jobs previously barred to them, such as aircraft manufacturing and shipbuilding, and they forced some unions like the United Auto Workers to confront issues like equal pay for equal work, maternity leave, and child care. Many women who had a taste of freedom working men's jobs for male wages hoped to remain in the workforce after the war. But government employers and unions saw women's work as only a temporary wartime necessity. Though ads told women working in factories that they were fighting for freedom, their language promoted victory, not women's rights or independence. After the war, most women war workers, especially those in high-paying industrial positions, lost their jobs to men. Indeed, war ads informed Americans that their work would help secure the American way of life after the war. Traditional families with the women at home and men at work, enjoying household appliances and consumer goods. Interestingly enough, you have a magazine cover showing a woman working industrial machinery, but notice she still looks very well put together, makeup, and her hair well done. And here you have several other images of women and their contributions to the war effort. And lastly, again, despite the independence that women gained during World War II, as soon as the war ended, women were expected to go back and take care of business at home. And if you notice, this propaganda poster, makes that very clear, that this was just a temporary situation. Okay, so that is it for Chapter 22, Section 2. If you have any questions, please let me know.